A young medic vanishes beneath a drained lake and wakes up in a blood-red battlefield, frozen in time. Warriors clash without sound. A cursed priestess hunts her, and an undead knight with glowing white eyes stands in her way. Protector or predator? As shifting ground traps her in a nightmare loop of stone, sand, and shadow, she runs through collapsing ruins and silent war zones, chased by ancient voices and the promise of sacrifice. Every step rewrites reality. Every reflection whispers secrets. She was just exploring. Now she might be the key to ending a curse, or starting something far worse. I was 24 when the hospital sent us to assist a rural excavation near San Ignacio. Some research group claimed they'd found temple stones buried under a drained lake bed. I wasn't part of the science crew. I was just there as a support medic in case someone fainted or got bitten by a bug. Nothing ever happened. Until that day. Around noon, I wandered off during a break. The soil near the southern ridge felt soft beneath my boots, almost hollow. A few taps with my heel revealed a strange echo. The others laughed it off, but I kept thinking about it. That night, I returned alone. No lights, just the moon, sharp and red over the dry basin. I scratched the surface with a crowbar, and the ground gave way. I didn't fall far, maybe 2 meters, but I didn't land on dirt. It was tiled stone, dark and smooth. The air was cool, moist, unnatural. I turned on my headlamp and saw carvings, symbols I didn't understand, half-sunken statues with open mouths and hands pressed together. I should have climbed out. Instead, I walked deeper. The hallway narrowed, sloped down. I swear I could hear something, like voices, but stretched and muffled. At the end, there was a circular room. In the center, a basin full of black water. I stepped closer and saw my reflection, but it wasn't me. She had my face but older eyes, and her mouth moved without sound. Then I blinked. Suddenly, I wasn't in the chamber anymore. I was standing on a field soaked in ash. Above me, a moon so red it pulsed like a wound. The sky was still, not silent, just waiting. I turned around and saw them, dozens of warriors locked in battle, skin painted, eyes wild. Their weapons clashed without noise. The air was frozen, thick like resin. Then she appeared. She called herself Soraya, tall, regal, wrapped in faded silk and bone charms. Her face had no age. Her eyes, the same ones from the water, glowed faintly violet. She touched my cheek and whispered words I didn't know. I couldn't move. She said I carried the blood of the lunar vein, the only blood that could end her curse. The ground trembled. From behind her, a figure emerged. A man in worn black armor, eyes dimly white, face half covered in soot. Bellin. He told her to stop, said I wasn't hers. His voice was broken but strong. They argued in a language I didn't know, until she raised her hand and shadows surged around me. I ran. The field warped with every step. Sand turned to water, then to stone. The battle raged in reverse, like time spun wrong. I saw others there. Ryan, a young girl hiding behind a broken statue, and Tharo, an elder with blind eyes and a staff carved from bone. They were waiting for someone. Me. I didn't wake up. I didn't return. I live here now, where moonlight never fades and the war never ends. I sleep beside fire pits under skies that never change. And when I dream, I still see the basin, the reflection, the moment I vanished. Maybe I drowned under that lake. Maybe I never existed. But when the wind howls, I hear Soraya's voice call my name, and it still sounds like mine. I transferred to St. Alira's hospital just after college. I didn't expect to love the night shift, but something about the stillness helped me breathe. Most nights were quiet. I brought books, checked on patients, and kept myself company. I was 23, barely 5 months into the job when it happened. That evening, Nurse Dana asked me to cover room 612. An older patient named Tom had been discharged early, so the room was empty. Easy task. I made a round, filled in the chart, and moved on. But when I passed it again an hour later, the door was slightly open, lights off inside. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I pushed it shut and thought nothing more, until just before midnight, when I saw it again. This time the door was wide open. Not ajar, fully open, lights flickering, bed made neatly. I went inside, turned the lights off and back on. Nothing weird, just a quiet room. Then I checked the patient list again, and something caught my eye. Room 6 and 12 had no record. No login, no checkout. The system just skipped it. I asked Dana if anyone had updated the assignments. She looked confused and said 6112 was under maintenance. I told her I'd already been inside. Her face changed. She said no one had stepped in there in 2 weeks. I returned later out of curiosity. The hallway was dim. I remember the humming of the vending machine nearby, the faint citrus smell from the cleaner, and how suddenly none of it felt right. The lights in the room turned on as I approached. No switch, no sound, just light. Inside, there was a man sitting on the bed. Pale skin, dark hospital gown. His back was to me. I froze in the doorway and said hello. No answer, just the steady creak of the mattress as he rocked slowly forward, then back. I stepped closer and saw the ID bracelet on his wrist. It was blank. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his profile. His eyes were shut, lips pressed tightly together. Then he whispered something too soft to hear. I backed away, and the lights cut off instantly. In the hallway, all seemed normal again. No one believed me. They said I was tired. Later that night, I saw him again. Not in the room, but reflected in the glass of the medicine cabinet in supply, just standing behind me, faint, watching. When I turned, the room was empty. I didn't sleep when I got home. I kept seeing his outline in mirrors, in windows, in my phone screen. The next night, I avoided the 6th floor. Took longer routes, double-checked every room. Then around 2 a.m., an emergency code came through. Room 612. I looked at the board. It wasn't listed. Dana saw it too. We stared at each other. Neither of us moved. Then the call came again. I grabbed my stethoscope and walked fast, heart pounding. When I reached the door, the lights were already on. The room looked different, older, paint faded, furniture not matching the rest of the floor. And the man was there again, sitting up, eyes open this time, gray, unblinking. He said my name. I stepped back. He stood slowly, his feet touching the floor with an awful softness, like he wasn't fully there. He told me he'd been waiting, that the room wasn't a room, it was a tether, a loop, a space that time forgot. He needed someone to see it, or it would vanish. With him inside, I didn't speak, I just watched. Then he reached toward the wall and touched a crack behind the curtain. The wallpaper peeled back and revealed an old photo. 3 nurses and a patient smiling. He pointed to the man in the photo. It was him. But the image was old, sun-bleached, dated 1974. He said they left him here. The staff moved on. No one logged the transfer. No one filed the death report. He had no name, just an empty bracelet and a room with no history. He asked if I would remember him. I couldn't answer. The lights flickered, and he faded slowly, like dust pulled into a vent. The photo was gone. The next morning, I checked the hospital archives. No records for room 612. No patient named Tom in the past 6 months. No renovations listed. I asked Dana again. She didn't remember the call, or me saying anything about it the night before. I tried to let it go, but last week I walked past the 6th floor and saw the door was open again. Neat bed, dim light, a figure sitting quietly with his back to me. I didn't go in. I just stood there until the light turned off on its own, and the door shut. I've always liked storms. The low rumble, the way wind moves through the trees, the silence that comes after. I was 25 when I transferred to Northvale Recovery Center, a small hospital just outside Flagstaff. Most shifts were peaceful. The patients slept early. The halls were warm. I worked evenings in the West Wing with Nora and Julian, 2 of the kindest nurses I'd met. One Friday, a dry wind hit the windows harder than usual. I noticed it when we wheeled Mr. Caldwell back from X-ray. Papers rustled where there was no draft. I mentioned it. Julian joked that the building was due for new seals, but Nora looked at the windows and didn't say anything. Her silence stayed with me longer than the wind. Later, I passed room 104 and stopped. It felt colder there. Not temperature cold, something quieter, like the sound had dropped out. The door was open just a crack. The curtains inside fluttered slightly, even though the window was closed. I stepped in and pulled the curtain aside. Nothing unusual, but the feeling didn't leave. We weren't supposed to assign patients to that room. Something about plumbing repairs that never got finished. But just before midnight, Nora told me they'd moved someone in, an urgent intake from the psychiatric unit downtown. She didn't have a file, just a note. First name, Izora. No age, no diagnosis. That didn't sit right. I walked to room 104. The lights were off. I knocked. No reply. When I opened the door, she was standing near the window with her back to me. Long dark hair, hands clasped behind her back. I called her name. She turned slowly. Her eyes were gray-blue, large and unfocused. She looked past me, not at me. She asked if the seals were still intact. I didn't understand. I told her everything was fine, and she nodded, then sat on the bed, still facing the window. The wind had stopped, completely. No movement outside, just a hollow pressure like something was waiting to breathe. I walked back toward the station. Julian wasn't there. Neither was Nora. The monitors were on, but all room feeds showed static. Only room 104 was clear. Izora still sat still, watching the glass. Behind her I saw something, a flicker like heat distortion. Then the lights blinked off. I grabbed my flashlight and returned to the room. It took me longer than it should have. Every hallway seemed to stretch slightly, angles wrong, corners pulled just a little too far. When I got to the door, it was wide open. Izara was gone. The curtains were still. Inside, the mirror was fogged. In the center, 3 symbols drawn with a finger. I didn't recognize them, but I remembered them. I had seen the same pattern carved into a driftwood panel at my grandmother's house as a child. She used to call them the wind seals. I heard someone down the hallway. Not footsteps, just breath. Slow, raspy, uneven. Then it stopped. When I turned, Julian stood there. His expression wasn't right. Blank, like sleepwalking. He said Isora wasn't a patient, that she had returned. Then he looked toward the ceiling, eyes wide, and whispered a name I didn't catch. The air around us got tight. I told him to walk with me back to the front desk. He followed silently, his hands trembling. As we turned the last corner, the fire doors shut behind us with a soft hiss. All the exit lights blinked out. My radio died. My phone screen turned to static. I went back to 104 one last time. Izora was inside again. This time she was facing the mirror. Her reflection moved differently than she did. I stepped in. She turned and said the seals were breaking, that once the third breath came, no walls would hold. I asked who she was. She didn't answer. The wind returned, louder now. Not outside. From within the room. It pulsed through the vents, under the door, and around my legs. She reached toward me, but not to touch, just to offer something. A silver medallion engraved with the same pattern from the mirror. I took it, and in that moment, the power surged back. The lights returned, the air calmed. Izara was gone. The mirror was clear. I ran out into the hallway. Nora was waiting, confused. Julian was gone. His badge still sat on the floor near the stairwell, next to his flashlight, still on. I filed no report. The name Izara vanished from the logbook. Room 104 was sealed again. They said no one had been assigned to it that night, but I kept the medallion. I still feel it grow warm whenever the wind rises, especially on nights when no one else hears it. I worked the front desk during overnight shifts at Briar Hollow Hospice. Quiet building, mostly end-of-life care. Most nights were calm. Sometimes a visitor came late to say goodbye. Sometimes no one showed up at all. I didn't mind the silence. I liked the slow hours, the sound of the coffee maker, the smell of clean linen. My favorite spot was by the east window. From there, I could see the distant hills beyond the parking lot. I'd bring tea and sit with the patient logbook, listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. That night was cold. Rain tapped lightly on the glass, the kind of rhythm that makes you feel like you're not alone. Around 2 a.m., a woman entered quietly. She wasn't on the visitor list. She didn't ask for directions. She walked with calm steps, long black coat, hair tied back. She stopped in front of the elevator and waited. I greeted her. She nodded, barely looked up. I asked who she was here for. She said the name Callan. There was no patient with that name. I checked twice. She stood still, hands folded. When I looked back, she was already inside the elevator. I called up to the second floor and asked David, the attending nurse, if anyone had a visitor. He said no. Everyone was asleep. But when I asked about the name Callan, his voice went quiet. Then he said he'd be right down. When David reached the desk, he asked me to describe the woman. I did. He looked unsettled. He told me that 10 years ago, a man named Callan had died in the East Wing. Young, late 20s, in palliative care. His sister used to visit every night. Her name was Morel. One night she didn't show up. She died in a car crash the same evening. After that, strange things were reported. A woman who matched Morel's description was seen in the halls, always near the east elevators, always during heavy rain. I didn't know what to say. David told me not to mention it to the others. He'd seen her once too, and it was better to let her pass. I tried to let it go, but something in her eyes lingered. They looked so focused, like she was listening for someone calling her. 2 nights later, it rained again. I was alone at the desk. Around 3 a.m., the elevator opened without a sound. I waited. No one stepped out, but I felt colder, like the air had shifted. I walked toward the doors. Inside, the elevator panel had no floor lit, just the emergency button glowing faintly. I pressed the ground floor again. Nothing happened. The lights flickered, then the doors closed slowly. I stepped back. The elevator stayed still. Then it moved on its own, back up to the 2nd floor. David was off that night. I called the station upstairs. Nurse Laurel answered. I asked if she saw anyone exit the elevator. She said yes, a woman, black coat. She assumed it was a relative for Mrs. Gaines, but now realized no one had buzzed in. I went upstairs myself to check. Laurel pointed to the hallway. Room 212. The door was closed, lights off. Mrs. Gaines was fast asleep, but there was a chair beside the bed. Someone had pulled it closer, and the blanket was tucked in tighter than usual, like someone had taken time. Laurel swore she hadn't done that. We left the room and checked the logs again. No visitors signed in. No one had opened the main door. I reviewed the camera footage the next day. The lobby feed cut out from 1:59 to 2:06. The timestamp jumped without warning. All other cameras were fine. That afternoon, I found something strange tucked inside the lobby logbook. A dried lily pressed between 2 blank pages. It was fragile but fresh. I asked everyone. No one admitted to putting it there. But one of the residents, Mr. Lewin, said something that caught me off guard. He said the flowers used to come for Callan. That Morel brought one every evening. She always picked it from the same spot on the trail outside. He said she believed flowers held memory, that scent could carry voices. Now I leave a lily near the elevator every time it rains. Sometimes it stays there all night. Sometimes it's gone before sunrise. But the east hallway has remained quiet since then. The elevator doesn't stop unexpectedly. The lights stay on. Still, when rain taps the window, I find myself glancing at the door, listening, and sometimes I wonder if she's still waiting for someone who already crossed, not knowing she's the last one left behind. I'd only been at Rosehill General for 3 weeks when they put me on the evening intake desk. It wasn't hard. I checked in patients, verified forms, directed ambulances. Most nights were slow after 10 p.m. I liked having that quiet buffer before sunrise. Fewer people, softer voices, fluorescent lights dimmed halfway. One night around 1 a.m., a man named Elias came in. Late 30s, clean clothes, calm voice. Said he was here for observation, sent from an outpatient center. But we had no referral logged. He insisted someone called ahead. I asked for his ID, and he hesitated, said he left it in the transport van. Still, something about him didn't raise alarms. His speech was clear. He smiled like someone used to being ignored. I checked the board again. No name, no transport, just a note scribbled on the margin. Room B2, Gray Wing. But the Gray Wing was closed. It hadn't been used since 2004 after a mold outbreak shut it down. I called upstairs. No one answered. I checked with the overnight nurse, Calvin. He blinked when I mentioned the name Elias. Said he hadn't heard that name in a long time. Then he just walked away, didn't explain. I buzzed security. No response. My screen glitched for a moment, just flickered once, then returned to normal. I turned around and Elias was no longer at the counter. I found him by the service elevator, just standing there. No buttons pressed, no movement. I told him the wing he asked for was out of service. He said he understood, but that was where he was told to go. I asked who told him. He said an old nurse, dark blue uniform, hair in a braid. The exact description of Nurse Fallon. Fallon had passed away nearly a decade ago. I didn't say anything. I offered to call the outpatient center again, but Elias was already stepping into the elevator. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't fear, it was something slower, a dissonance. Like I wasn't in the same time anymore. The doors closed without a sound. The panel lit up, B2. No one had the code to that floor. It wasn't connected to the rest of the hospital anymore. I ran to the stairwell. The air grew heavy the farther down I went. The concrete smelled damp, like dust sealed for years. I reached B2. The hallway was half lit, lined with unused gurneys and wheeled machines under plastic sheets. Everything was still. My footsteps echoed too loud. Room B2, Gray Wing, was at the end, door slightly open. I stepped in. It wasn't empty. Elias sat on the bed, facing a wall covered in faded blue tiles. He was humming softly. I asked why he came. He said this room remembered him, that it was the only place that still carried his name. I looked around. There was no chart, no monitors, no supplies, just a bed, a chair, and a mirror with something scratched along the edge. I stepped closer. The words said, "Discharged twice, never removed." He said he died here once, and then again, both times unrecorded, forgotten in paperwork, missed in handovers. No one filed the final note, so the system never let him leave. I wanted to leave then, but my legs wouldn't move. The light in the hallway dimmed behind me. From the mirror I saw a second reflection. A nurse, long braid, blue uniform just behind me. I turned around quickly. Nothing. Elias stood now, holding a small ID tag. I recognized the logo. Old Rosehill design printed before the rebranding. The photo was too faded to make out. But the last name read, Elias Gray. Gray Wing, built for long-term trauma care, shut down after structural decay. No records survived the transfer. I asked if he wanted help. He said no. That help had to come before they forgot his name, not after. He handed me the ID and said if I left now, the elevator would work for me. But only once. If I stayed too long, the room would shift again. I didn't understand. I nodded anyway. I left the room, walked quickly back down the hallway. The shadows moved slower than they should. When I reached the elevator, the door was open, light warm, music playing softly from the speaker. I stepped inside. The panel had one button, Lobby. As it rose, I looked down at the badge in my hand. The name was gone. Now it's just blank plastic. I tried showing it to my manager. She asked why I kept trash in my locker. I asked about room B2. They said there's no basement, only parking, and no one named Elias has been treated here in the past 20 years. But some nights when I pass the intake desk alone, I hear the old elevator hum beneath the floor. And for a moment it sounds like someone waiting to be admitted again. When I transferred to Belridge Hospital, I was assigned to the third floor recovery wing. It hadn't seen much use in years, mostly quiet cases. I liked that. The halls were wide and the light was soft. The windows faced the hills, and sometimes I stayed there after shifts just to watch the clouds settle in. I was 24. Fresh from an internship in Phoenix, still unsure of myself, still practicing how to sound calm when families asked hard questions. My supervisor was Marin, an older nurse with short silver hair and the sharpest memory I'd ever seen. She used to joke that third floor had its own secrets. One night, after everyone left and only 2 patients remained in care, the intercom cracked softly. I thought it was a signal test. Then I heard a whisper. Just my name, clear, gentle. My hands froze on the keyboard. I looked up at the empty hallway. I checked the PA system logs. Nothing had been transmitted. I asked Marin the next day. She blinked, then shrugged. Told me the speakers sometimes picked up old code from the weather station nearby, but she avoided eye contact when she said it. 2 nights later, I heard it again. This time it came from room 3B. That room had been locked since I arrived. I asked why. Marin said it was under maintenance. But the door wasn't marked, and the inside still had bedding folded, untouched. I turned the handle. It opened. The room was dim, one light flickering near the sink. I stepped in. The bed was made, but the pillow had a soft indent like someone had rested there earlier. The window was open slightly. A faint smell of flowers drifted in, not fresh ones, something older, dried. Then I heard it again. My name, this time followed by a second word, stay. I stepped out quickly, closed the door. The hallway felt colder, though the thermostat read normal. Back at the station, I tried not to look at the monitors, but one caught my eye. Camera 3B showed the bed. Empty, then it blinked, and for a moment there was a figure seated upright. I didn't sleep well. The next day I told Adrian, a tech who worked evenings with us. He said he'd checked the camera himself. An hour later he told me the file was gone. Not deleted, just not there anymore, like it had never recorded. That week, Marin went on leave, and I was left covering the entire floor with Ellie, a newer nurse from the second wing. On Wednesday night, I found her standing outside room 3B. She looked pale, said she heard someone crying inside. I opened the door, nothing. We both stepped in. The air was heavier than before, the lights dimmed slightly, just enough to notice. Ellie whispered that she could still hear it. I couldn't, but then we both turned to the window. It was closed, yet the curtains moved. There was no vent, no draft. We left the room and didn't speak of it again, but it lingered. A week passed. Then one of our patients, Mr. Delwyn, asked me who the woman was that sat at his bedside each night. He said she never said anything, just held her hands together, waiting. I thought he was confused, but when he described her, something inside me tightened. He said she wore pale gray, her hair covered her forehead, and she hummed softly like she was remembering something. He said she always left right before the hallway clock chimed twice. That clock had been broken for years. I went back to room 3B one last time. I wanted to see it in daylight. The sheets were gone. The mirror above the sink had been wiped clean, and carved into the base of the bed frame was one word: hushed. That night I asked the night janitor, Theo, if he remembered anything odd from that room. He said years ago, a woman had passed in there. Quietly. No visitors, no records of her next of kin. They didn't list her in the newsletter, didn't announce it at staff briefing. He said sometimes hospitals forget people, and sometimes the forgotten stay. I haven't heard the voice again.